I'm thrilled today to have Nuria agree to present. She's one of the community psychologists I just adore, and I adore her work. I was lucky enough to go up to visit the Pacifica program with Gregor Sarkeesian a number of years ago at the sponsorship of SCRA, and it's a wonderful program. They do wonderful work, and Nuria is one of the core people there. And she's done something so innovative, which is she's been doing very creative work in Chiapas with the local, and she'll describe the local folks, but she then wrote a textbook with them as co-authors. And it's just such a terrific model for all of us in practice and otherwise, that I wanted her to come and talk with us. She'll talk with her half an hour, 45 minutes, then we'll open it up for questions. But if you have a burning question while she's presenting, is it okay if they break in and ask it, Nuria?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so let me turn it over to Nuria without any other ado.
Thank you very much, Tom, and I have to say that the admiration is reciprocal. Steve can confirm that I usually tell my students that you were one of my main gurus when I started studying community psychology, and got very excited that you defended up to now and will continue to do so, practice rather than, the theoretical dedication to our discipline. So I learned it from you. Well, thank you very much for everyone who is here with me today. I'm really feel very honored to be here with you and all those who join me today. Thank you for your interest in this topic as well. Well, I'm going to start explaining a little bit of the geopolitical context of the place where this work has been evolving over now maybe more than 8 years, about 8 to 9 years. This, as Tom explained, is in the state of Chiapas in southern Mexico. That is located right at the border with Guatemala, about 40 minutes away from the border. This community that is called Lacanja Chansayab is called Mayan Lacandon, from the ethnic group of the Mayas. The Mayas have different ethnicities. Some are Lacandon, some are Tzotzil, Celtal, Chontal, Tojolabal. There are about 10 different ethnic groups that belong to the Mayans, and these are the Lacandon, who have been considered by many scholars as the direct descendants of the ancient Mayas, although some others differ, that there are so many other ethnicities that came from the original ancient Mayas. In terms of the geopolitics of the place, where one thing that has happened that is known worldwide is that the Zapatist movement actually emerged here, right here in the Lacandon Rainforest. The well-known Comandante Marcos has actually written memoirs of his settling there for many years and, organizing the communities to create the movement. However, the many ethnicities that are now settled there do not join the Zapatistas, perhaps based on fear, also because of the history of the role that the government has played in this area that has been very political, very conflictive because of the natural resources of the area. It is a natural protected area worldwide called the Blue Mountains. The Montañas Azules, that has had enormous resources for many countries that came throughout the years to exploit it, primarily through mahogany, medicinal plants, many other resources such as rubber to create plastic products. So you can imagine how it has been devastated, and the Mexican government has played a huge role in allowing international capital to settle there and destroy, extract the resources. So the government has played the role in manipulating the Mayan Lacandon to name them as the protectors of the area, because they have managed, in spite of all these pervasive interventions, to take care of nature. And biodiversity is quite unremarkable, maintained over years, over hundreds of years, thanks to the care and the position, the attitude they have towards nature, which is really, their gods are in nature, and it is their temple, their sacred place. Up until now. But the government gave them 600,000 hectares of this national protected area as their territory, and asked them to protect it. Whereas it also promoted many other indigenous groups throughout Mexico when the Mexican Revolution came, and they were demanding for land to move to this area and get the land they wanted to get in their original places. So there was an enormous exodus of indigenous peasants from many other places in Mexico that came to settle in the Lacandon Rainforest. So you can imagine the tensions that exist there. This community, besides the politics and socioeconomic historical catastrophes that had happened, together with, of course, the Spanish colonization that has definitely anchored its power there for all those centuries of colonization up until now. But remarkably, the Lacandon, the Mayan Lacandon had evaded the colonization of the Spaniards. By immersing themselves deeper and deeper in the rainforest. And the Spanish conquerors declared this zone as inhospitable, and they couldn't survive it, so they left. The religious colonization happened in this community rather in the late 19th, earlier 20th century with the Protestants and evangelists who come from the US. That's where right now we have the destruction of their own religious beliefs and rituals, etc. In terms of cultural legacy, this community is anchored in what is called the pyramidal triangle in this area, with the Palenque, which is a majestic sacred city built by the Mayas that is still there, preserved, still a lot to be, grounded out of the of the negligence that has happened. There are so many other pyramids that need to be found and seen, because they're covered with earth and mountains and bushes. The forest has covered it. So there are many other pyramidal areas, but the main ones from Palenque and Bonampak and Yaxchilan built a sort of triangle where this community is exactly located in the middle of this area. Very close to Bonampak, it's about 10 minutes, beautiful pyramidal area with legacy of the Mayans, still very clearly murals all over the pyramids that depict their cultural history, primarily based on rituals, songs, and medicinal rituals. So this, the way that I entered the community, when we say as community psychologists, we want to be invited, but I needed to first make contact with them. So since the 70s, I visited a research center in San Cristobal de las Casas, which is about 8 hours from from this community in the highlands on the other side of Chiapas. There were two Swiss anthropologists who settled there and opened up the opportunity for researchers to meet the communities and conduct research, and in exchange they wanted a copy of the research that was conducted. So I went there in the 70s and had access to these researchers that were done over the years, and met an author called Robert Bruce, who was writing about dreams in this community. And he told me, and he wrote extensively about the importance of dreams. And I've been always interested in depth psychology. So many years later, in 2009, about 30 years later, I came back there. Now this research center is a museum that houses the history of the Lacandon Mayan, because the Swiss anthropologists dedicated their lives to them. They actually donated their house to them. But as it always happens, the Mexican NGO took it over, because, you know, that's the racism in our country, always paternalistic towards the indigenous people and taking their resources away. However, they allow them to come and stay there anytime they want. They built an adjacent home for them. So I knew I will meet them there. I went there and, hung out in the place for days until I met a young man called Ernesto Chancayun. He was 70-year-old at that time, and he told me that he invited me to go to his community and he will be my guide, introducing me to his family and the people in the community and the places there. So I went with him the first time and we kept in touch up until now. At that time, we went together to the Borampak pyramids. We climbed them up the hill and we were sitting in one of the temples, and he started telling me about his dreams. And among them, he said that he wanted to study environmental management, and that there was the talk that a new university was going to be built right there in the rainforest, which is now there. It's called the Technological University of the Rainforest. And I went from then on almost every year at least, and knew that he was enrolled in his university studies. And I met him again. He came back to his community again in 2015, and we then made plans to write this book together. He has a chapter in the book where he describes the studies he did in his community about environmental impact assessment of deforestation due to international capital, due to activities in the community, and also about oral history that he learned from his grandfather and his ancestors, which is also remarkable that these young people are being trained in this university that is anchored in the place and is managing to not provoke that they leave their communities, but that they do research in their own communities and go back there and continue also nourishing their own wisdom, their own knowledge systems, sort of combined with these Western disciplines that they are learning there. So I went back in 2012 when I had my first sabbatical at Pacifica for 3 months. And one strategy that I used based on what I learned from community psychology, well, it's first that you hang out, you know, in the places where you observe that activity settings are taking place, where people gather the most. And that's where you just hang out and try to, you know, connect and build rapport with the people. So this community is quite spread because their organizational system is based on clans. They are together as extended family, and then because they are inserted in the rainforest, there are quite good distances between one settled of one family, you know, camp with the other. The Mexican government has also promoted giving them loans to create ecotouristic places, and they have actually constructed them with a remarkable ecological consciousness. So there are camps inserted in the forest, and all, for the most part, managed ecologically. There are signs all over, you know, warning tourists to be respectful and not leave their trash there. Well, so I found out that, of course, the school was, you know, the one place in small communities where the most activity settings were happening in that place. They had an enormous amount of students, although this is a very small community of only about 541 inhabitants, based on Ernesto's chapter and his studies on how many people were in his are in his community right now. So it's you know, it's very small. They have been shrinking over the years due to all the ecological devastations that have occurred. But the student body was about 150 children with only 2 teachers there in the elementary school, combined from almost kindergarten to 12th grade. And so, you know, observing that was happening, I went inside and talked to the teachers and said, well, I'm a psychologist and I'll be very happy to offer my services here if you need me. I think I didn't finish the sentence. They opened up a room and said, yes, we're gonna send you a bunch of kids we're having difficulties with. And as you can imagine, it's just the 2 of us, and we don't have resources. You know, there are a lot of kids that need attention, so we're going to send you a group of kids in right now. And in no time, I started my work there with about 40 kids that came to the library that they had there, and which was the largest room. And I started working with them. With what I learned that was a very important aspect of their culture, and this is dreams. I noticed that by living there, you know, being there, hanging out with them, in the first time when they see you, they don't say, how are you? They ask you, what did you dream? And that was very remarkable, you know. So you start talking about dreams like a continuation of your life and waking life. In no time you feel that there is no difference, you know, to dream or to be awake. So because I thought, well, that is a very important aspect of the culture, I started working with children in that way. I started asking them, what did you dream? And that was, you know, very easy way to get them to talk. And even though they were resisting to write and having difficulties learning to write, which is one of the symptoms that are nationwide in Mexico or in many other countries where the school system is another colonization venue. And indigenous children resist it, you know, because what they are taught does not pertain to their reality. And so, you know, when they see a combination of their culture with writing or, you know, reading, then you get them engaged, you know, naturally. So yes, they started writing, and they all speak Mayan. So the Mayan Lacandon, the language is not lost. And we started doing scripts based on a dream that they created together. So just by telling their dreams, building a circle, we started composing a story, and then we acted that story and presented it in a festivity. When the school closes every year, they make a festivity where the community is invited, and they see the children dance or sing, and we put this community theater together. The interesting part is that as a depth psychologist also, the story told in this script that was written by the children, they actually brought up the word kisin. Kisin. I started asking in the community what that means, and they told me, well, you know, it is the devil. But then I realized that even in the Bonampak pyramids, this kisin shows up in many other also codices from the Spanish people from that area as the god of death. The god of death, who is a god that plays a very enormous importance in the Mayan mythology. So the children were talking about kisin and a river. A river crosses their community that was carrying them in their dreams, and they said they came together and blew with their entire lungs to send this god away to another planet. I interpreted this theater script, you know, this story. To me, it became a deeply meaningful because it helped me explain first that the historical memory was still alive in the children, in spite of the strong presence of Protestant religion in there that comes mainly from the US, that has transformed kisin into a devil. And, you know, does not allow them to talk about it, but the children did as a cathartic movement there. And the community is divided because of all these Mexican policies of environmental protection that has imposed a policing system in the community. So that they don't get access to resources in the rainforest as a means, or their understanding, to preserve it. And so they are hiring young people who are many times, of course, they are their sons and nephews who become police in the rainforest. And if they see people who come to gather, to fish or hunt or gather, plants for food or medicine, they are, sent or condemned as a criminal act. So there are a lot of divisions happening right now, and I think the children, of course, perceive that as, you know, the river that divided Kisin as a god of death, threatening their survival. And the way they came up with a meteorite falls on the god, and this transformed this god in an owl that flies away to another planet. I found this myth existing for many time ago in a book that of an anthropologist who gathered oral history and mythology in this area for centuries ago. I mean, that has existed since, the beginning of time or something. It's as part of their mythology. So that became to me as a knowledge system that was contributed by the children. Because of my work in the school with the children, one of them introduced me to his father, who was working in a theater performance put by some Americans about the mythology of Palenque, and he hired local people to become actors. And well, I met the father of this child as a very, very gifted actor. He showed me videos of his performance. I actually saw the performance in San Cristobal de las Casas, beautiful one. And he put another performance in the school. We collaborated and invited him to then come to the school and help me out. And he put another performance about a Mayan legend in which a hunter hunts monkeys and to eat them, and also just for fun. And one day the monkeys organize themselves, gather, get the hunter, and bring them to live with them, so that he learns to get involved with them and love them, and never again thinks to kill them, and lives with them together and has children that are half monkeys and half humans. So that's another legend that shows the very common or threat in indigenous cosmologies and cosmovisions of the human beings not being the center of the universe, that we are sharing with many other species and nature is first. And animals are also before us, and we need to respect and live harmoniously with them. Mario actually came to Miami at the SCRA biennial in 2013, and Tom, you met him. He was in the practice council and the most engaged participant. He loved everything that was happening there. I was translating, and other people were also very helpful translating, and he absolutely loved that workshop. We presented together there, and when he was there, he shared a dream also, and told me that he was going to write a proposal to create a school. He felt very inspired in that conference by the superintendent of education, who was a guest speaker there. They actually came together and talked and about building a school based on their own culture, and also what he was considering as very important was to create a celebration, a community ceremony, so to say, based on a cultural festival that he wanted to happen every year. And that to me has been also a learning from my work in other communities in Mexico, Hawaii, that celebrations, community celebrations and festivals are very important because they contribute to community cohesion. And once you have that cohesion, then you can start another project, but you need to start with a ceremony and a festivity where the whole community cooperates to make it happen. And it is very important that resources are allocated there. So he started that way, with, he sent me the proposal in about a year. He gathered a couple of people together from the community. He also decided that divisions among the ethnic groups in the Lacandon Rainforest needed to be healed. So he looked for one representative of each community to come together and create the proposal, where he starts with the Popol Vuh praying to nature, and then developing his approach to start with a cultural festival and then build a Mayan school. As you can imagine, the government school does not happen in their own language. The Mexican government, for I'm sure a very conscious reason, now that there are a number of indigenous teachers that have been trained by the same government to teach in their communities, they are not sent back to their own communities. They are sent across to another community, so that in this community we had Celtal and Chol teachers who couldn't talk with the Mayan children in the Mayan Lacandon. So they have to use Spanish. And Mayan Lacandon teachers are sent to Celtal communities, so they cannot speak also their language. And the indigenous languages get, extinguished, of course, that way. So it's a very conscious policy that it's unbelievable, violent, and it's a linguicide. But together with it, the culture gets also extinguished, and it's a barbaric intervention that has existed for centuries now in Mexico up until now. So for them, of course, the creating of a Mayan school where their own knowledge systems, their own myths and legends that are so important as part of the cosmovision, their relationship with nature and their language will be preserved, became a priority. Well, that proposal is a chapter in this book, another chapter. Then the next time I came back to bring the results back to the community, I created a video. I brought a camera and gave the camera to them. And so all the activities we were doing, we were sharing the camera. I wasn't mainly taking any shots. They were all different people in the community taking the shots. And so I got help here to get a small video together that is available in the internet. I send them the link. Sometimes they have access to internet, so they were able to see it, but I found it important to come back and give it, to show it in my computer to the community and the children and make a celebration. And so in 2015, I came back to do that and had the fortune to meet a group of youth who were working, had just started building a non-governmental organization with funds from another non-governmental organization in Mexico that was promoting youth networks. And so they got money to come together, also as an intervention to get the communities together. There were youth from different ethnic groups in the rainforest who came together to build a youth network and develop different proposals to work in their community. They started mainly with raising awareness of environmental impacts provoked by foreign capital that is coming all the time since many centuries, in exploiting the rainforest, and how this government policing of the rainforest, it's not to preserve it, but to warrant that these foreign companies extract resources there, and that the people in the community don't have access to it. The government is giving them a stipend because now they are not allowed to live from the rainforest resources. And it has opened up stores where they sell products, junk products, like canned tuna fish or mayonnaise and chips and name it, all the junk food that they now buy with the meager resources they get. They put a lot of mayonnaise in tuna so that they get full with tortillas that they still make, but you can imagine also then the health consequences that are happening, diabetes and you name it, the typical that we find in indigenous communities. This youth cooperative and I band together, to write the proposal, and we actually used a SCRA mini grant call in the policy from the policy committee, because they were wanting to do that, to impact policies, mainly international policies, get their attention so that these invasions from foreign capital wouldn't continue to happen. So they are about, at that time they were between 18 and 23 years old. Now they're about 22 or so, around that age. They wrote a proposal, and it became evaluated. It became a very nice experience for them, because I asked for the evaluation of the people who read it. They didn't win it, but they had a very nice comments from the people who reviewed their grant, and that really empowered them very much to continue looking for other sources. And they had been finding sources. Now they have their beautiful NGO. It's more settled than before. And the proposal became then a chapter in the book. And I told them we tried to send it to other places, and we are going to make it a chapter in the book and continue working on this. But I told them they should feel very proud, because they competed with graduate students who are, already had a huge advantage of being there in the US. And two of the reviewers said that they should consider granting them some funds. One was hesitant that the impact wouldn't reach change in US policy, which, of course, yes, that was too ambitious, but it was great that they were connecting the dots with what they were doing and how to impact national and international policy. And so in 2017, last year, when I had another sabbatical, I spent 3 months there meeting with the young people and with the Mario, and he introduced me to his wife, who knew a lot of myths about the Mayan Lacandon cosmovision, and she wrote another chapter about their myths and stories. And the other youth, as we were talking, how this is what I understood to be indigenous psychologies, where their hearts and interests and their cultural knowledge systems were. They didn't like the word indigenous. They said that is from the colonizer legacy. They would prefer that we use their languages as identifiers, but if we did so, then I don't know, it would be said Sal, Lacandon, Tzotzil, and Chol in psychologists in a way. So we said, well, can we compromise? I asked them to use the word indigenous psychologists, because we can make more impact inserting ourselves in what is emerging already in the field. And they agreed. And so I wrote only, the introduction, the first 2 chapters, giving an introduction to the emergence of indigenous psychologies around the world, and how this is another contribution to that. The second chapter is just what I briefly reported here, with more expansion on geopolitical context and my methodology, that I'm just going to address briefly because we're running out of time, but to me, my main methodology I called affective conviviality, based on of convivencia, of being there, of developing relationships that are not colonial, that do not build what this scholars of the global South now contesting the imposition of Western paradigms and Western regimes of knowledge as part of the colonization, that we do not reproduce that as researchers, imposing our jargons and our paradigms, but learn from other paradigms, other cosmovisions that we desperately need, because the Western paradigm has really had tremendous consequences in the environment, as we know, and in people's lives, exploitation, oppression, you name it. So it is constantly being aware that we consciously or unconsciously do not impose what one Argentinian scholar called Mignolo calls the colonial difference, where we are conscious of our class privileges and, my colonial legacy from my own upbringing and my own family in Mexico, be constantly aware to not reproduce that difference and create horizontal relationships where I'm really learning from them and they feel that that is the case, that we are in the same level, contributing and co-creating this book together. So, and of course, the solidarity, the colonial solidarity that doesn't become paternalistic, or where we feel as saviors, missionaries, and we're going to do something for them. No, we are in the same boat, in a solidarity commitment to create change for a reciprocal, mutual transformation, so that their cosmologies, their cosmovisions, their knowledge systems, their ways of life can continue to exist and we can learn from them. Because I think this culture is exemplary in how they have managed the still existing biodiversity in the region. And that is for a huge, a contribution, a legacy for the world. Thank you.
That's amazing. I'm just awed. The last thing you talked about was, I didn't catch the phrase, affective confidentiality?
Affective conviviality.
Conviviality. Got it.
Yes, that's how I called it, building.
Wonderful word.
There is an indigenous community psychologist that you may know. His name is Sean Wilson, and he wrote a book called Research is Ceremony, where he describes the most important aspect of indigenous cosmovisions is relationship, kinship, relationship. So, for me, it's also was also self-reflectively acknowledging that I was also affectively getting involved with them, and they were affectively getting involved with me. And that's where the main way of working together can happen.
Great.
Just to share briefly, this is the book. I don't know if you can see it, all of you, but
You're upside down.
It comes all in like a mirror, but it's you can find it in Amazon and all that. I'm just very.
It's called Indigenous. Say it, what's the title?
It's called Indigenous Psychologies in an Era of Decolonization. It is edited by the series of Tony Marcella, that you may know, the cultural psychologist. There is a cultural psychology series in Springer.
Great. And maybe we can find a way to put this into at the end of the video so people can get it when they're done watching this.
Yes. I
Let
said
me open this up for questions. I could go on forever with comments and questions, but because it's so exciting to hear. But let's open it up. You're on mute, so remember to go off mute if you're going to be asking a question or making a comment. Who would like to start? And if you didn't introduce yourself in the beginning and you're making a comment, please do. I'm Tom Wolfe, by the way.
Nicole had to step off, but she left a comment there in the chat. Tom, if you'd like to read it, or I can read it.
I have to step off for another meeting, but thank you so much, Nuria. What I'm really connecting with is the idea of power sharing and the distribution of expertise. One thing that I think is difficult for those who do not do entrenched community work is recognize the expertise of the non-academic knowledge experience. The more we can spread the idea that expertise is not owned by academia, the better. Thank you again.
Yes.
And I would comment on that, this is a gorgeous example of doing that gracefully and consciously.
Thank you. Yes.
Someone was going to comment on that? I think we often struggle with trying to find models of how to go into other communities and be able to make that connection without it being hierarchical and horizontal, and especially in a place that's been as exploited as that. And I think a number of people know that I've been in this exchange with folks in Kentucky around the Trump, non-Trump thing. And we are right smack against that issue. We love each other, we talk with each other, but there's a real sense of haves and have-nots. And so they're gonna come up here and visit in the fall, and it's gonna be about the haves and have-nots and how does that affect who we are. And they do a lot of their work in Kentucky with community theater. So it really resonated with what you were talking about. Other folks want to get in on this?
I just want to apologize for being late today, but I was actually reading the papers submitted by your students for the special TCP issue, and I got caught up in that. And I think they've written a lot of really great stuff around this topic. And I think it's just really eye-opening to read their papers too. So that's why I was late, and I'm sorry, but it's really good.
That's Susan who's talking.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, this is Susan Wolfe. I was late getting on the call because I was editing.
Oh, thank you, Susan, and no apologies needed. That is more important, so don't worry. Thank you.
Well, and you know, your story about the policy mini grant is such an eye-opener. First of all, it breaks my heart that it wasn't funded, but but how it helped them nonetheless. And I know that the executive committee is grappling with, what's the value of these mini grants? And boy, this is a story about even one that didn't get funded and the value of it, because it brings resources, or the idea of resources, to groups that would never think about it.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
I think it would be helpful for the executive committee to know that, because I don't think people realize that this year funds were cut back. We have a much smaller budget to work with, SCRA does. So all of the mini grants were cut this year.
Yes.
And decisions, they're looking into it, but please share that so that they know.
Well, for me, my rant on the mini grants is that we talk about being a society that believes in community psychology and affecting the communities out in the world. And the only thing I think we do directly is the mini grants. Everything else is really serving our own needs. And it's tragic that that small amount of money is being considered as the first thing to cut. Now, of course, we started it because the Practice Council started putting out mini grants, and then everybody else said, "Oh, let's get in on it." So I know we've overwhelmed the executive committee, but I hope they go back and find some reasonable way to parse out some money for the cause, because this is an amazing story.
Yeah, thank you.
I think they're going to be evaluating. I know that there's going to be an evaluation of what that's done, and I think there's just going to be. It's hard to tell what can happen moving forward because of the funding that SCRA receives has been so drastically cut back right now. It has to do with journal negotiations and stuff like that. But we lost a lot of money.
But, you know, I was involved in the policy community for a while, and, you know, was making the point that there's not much talk about how US policy impacts other places. You know, it's more of a, I'm sorry what I'm going to say, but I felt very claustrophobic, you know, it's very like US oriented and not seeing the impacts that it's doing in other places of the world, you know. So to me,
This is
that
a magnificent opportunity to get right into that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else got to jump in on this? Come on, this is the most exciting talk I've listened to in a long time. Oh, here comes Susan James.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Nuria. I need to run. Talk to you soon.
Hello, my name is Rafael, and I'm here with Gordon from UMass Lowell, University of Massachusetts in Lowell. We are in the Community Social Psychologist program, and wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I'm from Brazil, and I have a question to Nuria around a language. I know in Brazil there's been some with researchers starting to, in that way of language and dialogue, introducing language and honoring the languages, which a lot of times, like the colonizers' language, like English, Spanish, Portuguese, might not be able to, how can you say, truly describe something, and then words in that language, in the original language, have that possibility due to their cosmology, due to how they approach, how they see the world. And my question is around how can we integrate that? Because a lot of times you see English words being brought into like Spanish, Portuguese, and that doesn't get questioned because that's academia, that's coming from the West. But how can we do the counter movement of introducing these words, paying homage to these languages, also without like being in a colonial sense where it's just being used for research? I was wondering if you have any reflections around that. How can we, resgatar, I'm not sure how that word is in English, but how can we bring back and pay homage to those languages in constructive and in ways of solidarity? And thank you so much. You're amazing.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree with you, you know, and I mean, talking about doing self-reflexivity and being aware of the way that we continue to impose coloniality consciously or unconsciously. You know, this book is written in English. And I started with Spanish and shared the stories and what I was writing with them in Spanish. They have that, but it's not in Mayan Lacandon. Mm-hmm. And I don't speak their language, but I may have made efforts to understand, you know, their language and the way definitely that it's anchored in the cosmovision. It came actually from them, you know. One of them who is young girl who has been the one who created this NGO I was sharing, sent me a link to this initiative from UNESCO now with promoting indigenous languages. And yeah, we made the effort that we need to translate what we did in their own languages and, like you say, start getting into forming concepts that that are not possible in other languages. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, that's definitely work that needs to be done, and a self-critique, you know, that that is not in the work I did because I didn't learn their language and start writing it in their language instead of in the colonial English language. Mm-hmm. So That's it.
And maybe the respectful way to do that is not for us to come impose on them the idea that their language should be the language, their original language should be the language spoken, but to see the examples where this is happening. I was a tourist in Alaska, and I was so struck because it was a very sensitive tour about the native groups where their young people were learning the language and teaching the language to the elders who'd lost it. And this was not promoted by the West. So the question is, how does that happen spontaneously? That would be a good community psychology question, as opposed to how do we try to make more people do this? It's happening, and how is it happening? And what can we learn about it? And it most likely relates to the things you were talking about: cohesion, horizontality, co-creation. That must be where it's hopefully is it where it's coming from. So we have time for one last question or comment. Well, my deepest thanks. This has been amazing, and we have to do some kind of write-up, and maybe we can do it with Susan on the phone in the TCP or somewhere, so that many people go to view the video when it's up. It'll take a little bit of time for it to be up, because this is just remarkable. I mean, it's such a good story of working with the community respectfully, and I love the story about they don't say hello, they tell you their dreams. Coming from Pacifica, that's got to be a gift. Because dreams are so part of the depth psychology program there. So it's a wonderful story. We look forward to reading it in the book. Thank you all for joining us. If anybody has an inspirational idea about who else I should be inviting, give me an email. And a deep, deep thanks to you, Nuria, for a wonderful hour.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of you for giving your time. Thank you. It was an honor being with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nuria.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nuria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom, did you want to talk about TCP?
Why do you want to give me a buzz?
Oh, I'll just email and tell her, please